Today I'm going to share a wonderful black walnut pound cake recipe with you. This recipe comes from Granny. I know it's really common though. It's not one that she created or anything like that, but it is one that she's become kind of famous for in our family. We all really love it, especially my nephew Mark. It's the one that he requests most often for Granny to make. Now if you've never had black walnuts, I just have my cup here ready. I wish I had one. This is the wrong time of the year, but I wish I had a whole one to show you. I do have a video on black walnuts though, so I will link to that so you can go, if you're not familiar with them, you can go see. But they have a very unique taste that lots of people do not like. They're very strong. I love them. My whole family loves them, except Matt. He's not that crazy about them, but I really love them. But it is kind of an acquired taste. I think this cake would be good if you used regular English walnuts or something else, but it really makes the black walnut shine. It really just makes it shine if you like that flavor. So Granny's been making this recipe for many years, and she got it from her sister, Dorothy. We all called her Aunt Dot. She was one of Granny's oldest sisters, and she lived in Gastonia. And a kind of an interesting story connected to her is that when Granny, you know, the way of large families like that, there was 11 children in Granny's family, 9 who lived to adulthood. And you think about those older ones, some of them were already married with kids when those younger ones were still, you know, coming up, still being raised. So Granny, sometimes in the summer, she was a young girl, she would go to Aunt Dot's. Aunt Dot's would come out and get her and take her back home to Gastonia, and she would help her in the summer with her children. She had 2 sons, and Granny really loved to be there and to stay with them. You know, it was exciting to get to go somewhere different. And Aunt Dot and her husband, they run a little store, so that was exciting too. Well, while they were there during those times, Granny would meet, you know, her Aunt Dot's sons. She, of course, met their friends and, you know, kind of met the people in the community and all that. Well, one of the families that she had the great fortune to meet, Hazel was the lady's name, and she had children that was kind of the same age as Aunt Dot's. Well, years later, when Granny was grown and was going to get married to Pap, she learned that Hazel and her family, all those years ago that she had met when she was a girl at Aunt Dot's, staying, had never seen Pap, never knew about him, never knew anything about him. That was his aunt. Lovely lady. We love, all of us love her dearly. Of course, I've known her my whole life, but I always thought that was the most interesting story, that how Granny met part of Pap's family years before she ever met him, really far away from home in those days. Gastonia is still a far piece from here, but in those days, when you think about the difference in roads and cars and travel, it was a really long way. But it was really wonderful that she actually met Hazel and her wonderful family before she met Pap. Now, as far as pound cakes go, this is a pretty easy one. I'm going to go over the ingredients for you, and I'll also put them in the description below. But you need 1 cup of butter, 1/2 cup of shortening, and I use Crisco. You use whatever you prefer. 3 cups of sugar, 5 eggs, 3 cups of cake flour, and I'll tell you a little trick about that in a moment. 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 cup of milk, 1 cup of black walnuts, 1 tablespoon of black walnut flavoring, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. That's all the ingredients. And it's not a cake that has an icing or anything. I suppose you could make up some sort of glaze and pour over it if you wanted to, and that would be good. I do have a black walnut cake recipe that has a frosting. I'll also link to that in the description below so you can go see it. It's really good too, kind of like a caramely icing. Anyway, but the cake flour, I was going to give you a little tip about it if you didn't know. So when I was growing up, sometimes Granny would buy that, and I would see it come in a box. I think maybe Swan was the name of the kind that she bought, and she used it for some of her cakes, but other times she would just use, you know, all-purpose flour, self-rising flour, whatever the recipe called from. But after I was married, I realized I found in a cookbook where you could make your own cake flour. When I was growing up, I thought it was some specialty, you know, some weird exotic something that no one could make unless you bought it from the store. But really, all it is all-purpose flour and cornstarch. So the best way, it's kind of easy way to think of it, is if you need a cup of cake flour, you get you a cup of all-purpose flour and you take out 2 tablespoons of it. Take out 2 tablespoons. You replace those 2 tablespoons with 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, and then you mix it all up really good together so it's thoroughly incorporated, and you have cake flour. So for this recipe that called for 3 cups of cake flour, I did that 3 times. You know, I had 3 cups, or you could do it any variation you wanted to. If you want to put it all in there and take out 6 tablespoons, put 6 tablespoons back, you get the picture. Either way you want to do it would be fine. So that's a little trick for that if you don't have cake flour on hand. Now I'm going to move over to the mixer and show you how to put it all together. It's really simple. So the first step is to cream the shortening and the butter. Okay, now we're going to add all the sugar and mix that in. Okay, now we're going to start adding the eggs one at a time and mixing after each egg. Okay, now that we've got all the eggs in, we're going to, let me scoot this a little bit. We're going to sift together the cake flour I made and the baking powder. Which I'm dumping out the sides there. There's our baking powder. So now we're alternately going to add the flour and the milk. Scoot back over here a little bit. We'll start with some flour. Okay, now we're almost at the end. We're going to add our walnuts, our black walnut extract, and our vanilla. And that's it. Now we're ready to put it in the pan. Okay, it's time to put it in the oven. When it comes to what pan to use, it is a pound cake, so I'm going to use this is like a tube pan that I have. I'm going to use it. Now sometimes Granny uses her bundt pan, but sometimes she uses 2 loaf pans, like what I made my honey bread in the other day. So I think that's like 8x4 or something like that. Sometimes she uses that. I'm always glad when she uses those because then she usually sends one home with me, which is really nice. But anyway, even though it's a pound cake, you could use whatever kind of pan that you have, or maybe multiple pans like Granny does sometimes. And we're gonna, after I get it in here, we're gonna bake it at 325 for an hour and 30 minutes. Now, the first time you make it, your oven may be slightly warmer or colder than ours, so you need to keep a check on it, especially that first time, just to make sure that you don't get it overdone. Or underdone, I guess. And I can't remember if I said that or not, but I did grease my pan, and I just used shortening. You could use whatever you feel comfortable using or whatever you prefer. Okay, I'm ready to put it in the oven, and when it gets out, I'll show you how it turns out. So So I just got the cake out of the oven. It's still hot. I'm one of those people, I can just never wait for it to cool completely like you're supposed to do with cakes or pies or any kind of desserts. I've got to taste it right then. So I have my pan that I use is one of those with a bottom that pushes up, that kind of, it's 2 pieces. So I got that piece out. I mean, I got the first piece off, but as you can see, it's still really hot. I didn't get this piece, and I'll probably just leave it like that to tell the truth, because you can still really make some good slices, slicing it out. So I wanted to hold this piece up to you though and show you that wonderful texture of pound cakes, how wonderful they are, and then you can see the walnuts. And I especially like this one, this cake, if you can see right there, it kind of gives, the top gets a little crunchy on top, and I really like that part too. So now I'm going to taste it, which I already know it's going to be delicious. I'm a black walnut fan, so that part just puts it over the top for me, any kind of dessert that has black walnuts. But I love the pound cake texture, where it's kind of soft but kind of fluffy but kind of firm. All those, just that nice texture that pound cakes have. So it's so good, so good. It's hard to beat a good pound cake. Just sort of melts in your mouth. Very, very good. One of my favorites. Like I said, I like all pound cakes, but the ones like this with black walnuts really are over the top for me, just because I'm such a black walnut fan. Another neat thing about this recipe, Aunt Dot had noted for Granny, and then Granny noted it on where she wrote it down, is if you don't like black walnuts, you may not be like me, you may not be a fan of them, and you wanted to say make it an orange pound cake or a lemon pound cake, you could just leave out the nuts and then change that extract to lemon or to orange, and that would work too. So that's neat. It's kind of like a basic recipe. I'm sure you've probably even seen a pound cake recipe just like this before, maybe that didn't have black walnuts, or maybe that did. So that's a neat little trick that you can use with this recipe. So I hope if you try this black walnut pound cake, you like it as much as I do. I'm always glad for you to stop by and help me celebrate Appalachia, which is a lot of wonderful foodways, and especially meaningful to me are the ones that are passed down. Even though Aunt Dot, I'm sure, didn't come up with this recipe, Granny sure didn't, and I sure didn't, just knowing that those different people in my family made it and loved it. And then like my nephew Mark, that he loves it. It's his favorite cake that he asked Granny to make. All those makes it more meaningful to me. I can just imagine that Mark's also going to share it with his little boy and his future children, and how that recipe will just keep going on through our family.